The wildcard round is nearly in the books, and it's time to rewind with the wildcard rewind. What an intro. Let's get into it.
I just want to rewind to when we were young at heart. Back to all those good times. Take me back to the start.
That is right. We are back again. We have had a few weeks off due to Christmas and also due to illness, but mainly due to Christmas. But we are back again with the best three. The regular season is over, but the playoffs are here, and aren't they magical? Although, I don't want to start things off on a bad note, but you guys might not know how magical they are because both of your teams are missing the playoffs. If we were recording this tomorrow, it would be the same for all three of us. It is the best three today, so I'm joined by my two wonderful co-hosts. Hannah, how are you?
Well, I was great, Lewis, until you had to kind of stick the knife in and remind me that the Bengals aren't in the playoffs, even though after a few games yesterday, I thought, oh, they totally could have been way better games with the Bengals in than with the Bengals out. But I'm not going to jump on the bandwagon that everyone's moaning about, with Bengals fans saying that the Chiefs chose to tank that Week 18 game on purpose because they were scared of us. Totally understand that they might want to do that. But no, of course they didn't. I mean, who would choose to play so terribly as they did? Probably none of the players on the field. But it was just a bit of a squib, to be honest, for us. You know, we were really excited. Oh, we need all these things to happen. The Dolphins lost. We were like, great, you know, everything could fall into place. And it all fell apart. But anyway, still good fun to watch the playoffs. Actually, I think I prefer it as a neutral, to be honest. It's less stressful.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. And the expert on being a neutral in the playoffs is, of course, Paul Pickin. Paul, how are you doing? Did you enjoy the games this weekend?
Yeah, of what I've seen, obviously, you find that the playoffs don't really work well with UK time unless you're really willing to stop up really late. I think we had one that was 6 o'clock Sunday evening. Apart from that, they've all been at 9:30 at night or 1 o'clock in the morning, you know, so from what I have seen, yeah, it's been really good. I have to say, you say that we're not part of the playoffs or anything, but actually Arizona are part of the playoffs, mate, because you're borrowing our stadium. You know what I mean? So yeah, you have fun losing in Arizona, okay? Because it is amazing. We do it week in, week out.
It is a little bit. We're going to talk about the Rams Viking games in a minute. We can actually, do you know what? We can kick that off now while we're talking about it.
Do we have to?
Well, I wanted you guys to give a little bit of a prediction going into it because I don't really know how to feel, because I was very optimistic, especially given the fact that beating the Vikings is what turned our season round in sort of week 7, when we then suddenly went on this massive winning streaks and won 9 of the last 11. But then, obviously, everything that's happened with the fires in LA has now forced the game to be played elsewhere. And I feel like the fact that we were talking about this beforehand, like the fact that the Rams have had to move but also haven't been able to practice, is going to really put a damper on things. So I actually, you know, you mentioned staying up late. I actually don't think I'm going to stay up tonight. I think I'll watch in the morning and see, or maybe ask my fiance to check the score and be like, if it's within 10 points, tell me to watch it. If it's not, don't, and leave me to it. But I'll come to you first, Hannah. What's your thinking on the game tonight? Are you leaning Vikings?
A little. I think it all depends on what Rams team plays, because they've been kind of two ends of the spectrum this season. It's been like the Bills game, putting up 1,000,000 points, beating a really great team. And then there's been those games where they can't seem to manage to do anything, and it's like 6, 9 points or whatever. And I think it kind of depends on which team kind of takes the field. So I do think you've got a chance to win, but because you're so kind of suppose unreliable in kind of what we expect from you, I think you're the most likely to lose. So I am leaning Vikings, even though Sam Darnold had a terrible week last week. And there is a chance that he does well under the pressure. The only thing is, I do think your defense is relatively young. They've been playing well, but they're quite young, and I wonder whether it will help Darnold to kind of feel a bit more, himself. So I'm going to lean the Vikings, but I wouldn't be surprised if I woke up tomorrow and the Rams had, managed to do it. It all depends a little bit on that defense too, doesn't it? The Vikings defense and what they kind of Flores pulls out.
It's just really weird that it's entirely the other way round to what we thought the Rams season was doing. That it's now defense playing really well and holding the opposition under 20 points 3 straight weeks, and the offense can't score more than 20, which is mad. Do you have any thoughts, Paul?
So I think you're asking the wrong people here for predictions, because as we've shown on the season, we're not really the best with predictions. But I'll go with it. I kind of want to echo what Hannah's saying. Like, it kind of depends on what Rams team shows up, because I think that tonight could be a game where it's like a sort of like a, I don't know, like a 19-12 or something like that. Or it could be, you could see 30 points from each team, and, Puka Nakua and Justin Jefferson are just having absolute worldy days. I think I lean Vikings, but I think that's me wanting Sam Darnold to make the Super Bowl with the Vikings, and just completely from nowhere, this quarterback that was dead to everyone 12 months ago has turned up at the Vikings, and somehow now everyone's like, he's just amazing. And I just really hope that he could take him to a Super Bowl and really give the Vikings something to think about going into next season and go, is he our franchise QB? You know what I mean? He's turned up and he's taken us to a Super Bowl. So I really want the Vikings to sort of shock everyone with that. So I think I do lean the Vikings, though.
Sorry.
No, you carry on.
No, I'm just going to be a bit naughty here and kind of slide us on to like a different way than we were planning to go. But don't you think that basically if they do decide, right, we're going to keep Sam Darnold, it's a little bit like Kirk Cousins 2.0? He's fine, and he can, if he gets on a heater, he can do well. But Sam Darnold is not going to be the reason that you go to the Super Bowl, right? He's not like a Mahomes or a Burrow or a Allen or a Lamar. That they are the guys that's going to get you there. He's going to steer the ship, but he's not going to be the reason they get there, right? So I was like, why would you make that same decision again? They got rid of Kirk because they were fed up of that. So why would you do the same again? I know it's difficult to get rid of him when he's done so well, but I just think it's going to be Kirk, 2.0, and then it's kind of pointless having to move on in this timeline when you're just doing it all again.
I just think, I think there is genuinely no point in paying a quarterback without an elite ceiling. And it doesn't have to be an elite quarterback. But obviously, I mean, for the 3 franchises that we support, I think Joe Burrow is clearly the best quarterback. But Kyler Murray and Matthew Stafford both have elite ceilings. That's the reason they've been paid the amount that they have. And when you pay a middle-of-the-road quarterback elite money, which is what they'll have to do with Darnold, it's what the 49ers are going to have to do with Brock Purdy. We've seen it with Tua and the Dolphins. I think there's an extent to which we've seen it with Baker Mayfield as well. You feel good about it at the time, but the moment that the wheels start to fall off, you're suddenly locked into a contract you can't get out of. And if the Vikings pay Sam Darnold, say they get to the conference championship and get beaten by the Lions again, they're going to feel like they have to pay Sam Darnold, but they shouldn't. The whole point is that you only got so far because the quarterback that you're paying all this money to has a ceiling, and this season you're barely paying him anything. So why would you want to sort of cap that ceiling even more by giving him, $40 to $50 million a year? It just doesn't really make any sense to me.
Can I just say, I've never seen Hannah agree with you more than when you went, out of all our teams, Joe Burrow is clearly the best QB. She was just sort of like, do you know what, Lewis? You are very right with what you've just said. You know what I mean? I'm so happy and agree with you more with that statement. I do agree with you. Yes, it is hard to pay somebody like Sam Darnold elite tier money, and I don't think they will waste that money on him. But I think ultimately, looking at what QBs are about and what they've got, he's better than what they can have, I'm not saying JJ McCarthy is worse or better because we've not seen him, but I think the Vikings are a team that kind of like that vanilla, they like that, and they know what they've got with him and stuff like that. And I just think if he was to sort of take them all the way, I know what you're saying, and I agree, Hannah, he's not the reason why they're at the Super Bowl. There's a lot more factors, but if he's steering the ship all the way to the Super Bowl, I think they'd find it hard to then go, we're not gonna offer you this contract. You know what I mean? I think it'll be a bit of a, because if they don't, and then they say, oh, right, JJ McCarthy's our guy going forward, and then all of a sudden it's 0-1, 0-2, 0-3, 0-4, then they're going, shit, what have we done here, But I completely agree that Sam Darnold isn't that elite tier quarterback. He is a middle of the bag kind of guy. He is very much Kirk 2.0. He's very similar to him, very similar with everything. And I just think I just love an underdog story, and I love Sam Darnold coming from nowhere back into the Vikings, getting the start because JJ McCarthy got injured, and now you're looking at a team that up until the last day were battling for that number one spot going into the playoffs, and I love that story. I hope Netflix are following him around.
With I think Darnold's a really interesting fantasy asset as well, and obviously we predominantly look at redraft, but like there in Dynasty, there's a really interesting angle here of what you think is going to happen with him, knowing how well he finished this season. But looking into next season, if he were to stay in Minnesota, they were to sign him to, so the Baker Mayfield deal was $33 million per year for 3 years. If they were to just sign him to that deal, I think he finished, I mean, I do have it in front of me because this is what we're talking about today, but he finishes a QB9 this season. Would you be drafting him as a top 12 quarterback next year?
I'll go first. With this one. No, I don't think I would. And do you know what? It's so similar to Kirk Cousins. Kirk Cousins, how many times has he finished as a QB1 on the season? And he's had great seasons. And then you get to the draft and you sort of, off the top of your head, you could reel 7, 9 QBs, maybe even 10 QBs straight away like that you take over him. You know what I mean? So I think he is, you could probably argue like a high-end QB2, but I don't think I'd be taking something like Sam Darnold as a QB1. I think there is a lot of, I haven't looked into the numbers, but if you start looking into the numbers, I bet there's QBs that had injuries or missed games and stuff like this that probably could have finished above him at the end of the season if they'd have played a whole season and pushed him as a QB2. So I think people would be foolish to take something like Sam Darnold as a QB9. I think that's his ceiling, and you'd be taking him and hoping that he repeats what he did this season,
Yeah, and that's sort of the feeling to me that like this is the best that Sam Darnold can possibly be, right? The season we've just seen is the best Sam Darnold it's possible to see, and even that includes quite a few games where he fell to pieces. Like I think with the Jags game as well, obviously the Lions game he was awful, but the Jags game midway through the season that they won like 12-9 against the Mac Jones led Jaguars offense. Like he does have the capability to just fall to pieces, and this is the best it's been for him. So yeah, I don't think I'd be particularly interested next season. Do you guys want to do some quick predictions for the divisional round games that we already have in mind? And then we do have some big news to talk about. So the wildcard round games that we have currently, let's start with the big one, which is going to be Bills-Ravens. Hannah, what do you think about this one?
This is going to be the best on the slate by far. This is going to be awesome. I'm really looking forward to this. I want to say Bills because I hate the Ravens, but I think the Ravens are going to win it. They say everything seems to be coming together at the right time. I suspect when they get to the Chiefs and Mahomes in the championship game, they probably are going to fall to pieces. But I think they're going to beat the Bills in the divisional round. I really think everything's coming together. And the Bills played okay this week, but I don't think they were on their best form. So I could definitely see the Ravens. They seem to have lots of kind of different tools in their bag on offense, and the defense is finally kind of putting things together. So I'm going Ravens on this one.
I love that. How about for you, Paul?
I don't think there's a wrong answer, Lewis, if I'm honest. I think if I sit here and say I think it's the Ravens, I can make an argument for it. If I say it's the Bills, I think I can make an argument for that. I think I agree with Hannah. This is the game to look for. This is the one that you'd want to see the weekend after, you know, the championship round game, Bills Ravens. I think that would be fireworks. So just for the fun, I'm going to say the Bills win it. Just to go the opposite.
I completely agree with you, and I think it's such a shame that this game's going to explode for 80 points, and the week after the Chiefs are going to win 12-11 off a safety. I think that's just the nature of how this is going to fall. I think I lean Ravens. I really wanted to, and I was thinking while you were talking, Hannah, where do I want to lean here? And I was like, bold prediction: whoever wins this matchup wins the Super Bowl. And then I was like, no, because I think the Chiefs just beat them, and I think the Chiefs just stink their way to a three-peat. But yeah, I think Ravens for this one. Chiefs Texans. Any chance the Texans can throw them off?
No. That offense is too terrible. The defense played out of its mind this week, and I think they have to do that, and the offense has to do more to possibly win. There's no way. There's no way they're going to win.
They don't look good enough. They don't. I think you need a team like the Ravens or the Bills that look like they're firing. Like you said about the Ravens, firing on all cylinders. That's the type of team that will beat the Chiefs. And I just don't think the Texans are quite there yet. I think they've got a team that could do it. I think, but they need a bit more to complete it. So I think the Chiefs win that one.
Yeah, I just can't really see any way in which the Texans win this game or can even really score 2 touchdowns at the minute. That Chargers-Texans game was genuinely insane. Every time I looked up, something mental was happening. Getting a 2-point conversion off a blocked extra point. I've never seen that before. That's genuinely fantastic, and I loved it. So yeah, Chiefs as well. And then the only other game that we know currently is the Lions-Commanders. Do we just think the Lions steamroll, or do we think Jaden Daniels can keep it going?
I think he puts up a better fight than what you'd expect the Texans to do against the Chiefs. I think our Washington team's very exciting, and I think they can very easily go toe-to-toe and score as many points. But I think on the night, I just don't think they've got quite enough to beat the Lions, if I'm honest. Don't get me wrong, I think the Commanders are on the right track, and I think they're a team to look out for moving forward, but I just don't think they've got quite enough to beat the Lions.
How about you, Hannah?
This really feels like the Lions year. I know they've got loads of injuries, but, the way they played last week, I'd be gutted if they don't make it to the Super Bowl. I really feel like everything feels like it's coming into place and aligning, and I really want them to get there. And I think this offense is too good for that Washington defense. I know they're playing much, much better, but I just don't think they've got enough to contain them for, Daniels to keep up. So I think it's going to be the Lions.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with you. I'm going to do, we will actually get onto the show sheet in a minute. 2 last tiny little predictions or your opinion. At this point, with the teams that we have left in it, what is the most fun possible Super Bowl matchup? What's the one that would excite you the most? And what is the most boring possible Super Bowl matchup?
So I think for me, the most fun would be, it's got to be Lions. Lions have got to be in there. They're just so much fun from the NFC. To be honest, AFC wise, I think Ravens or Bills, I think both of those would be pretty fun. So I would be happy with any of those 3, to be honest, because I think that would be lots of points, fireworks, lots of fun. Boring Chiefs.
Yep.
I think to me, probably most boring Chiefs and Rams, I think, to be honest.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree. I think potentially, and this is obviously not going to happen. Imagine a Texans Commanders Super Bowl. 2 offenses that can be great, two defenses that can be awful, a rookie quarterback, a sophomore quarterback. Wouldn't that? It would be so much fun to just not see any like a good team in the Super Bowl. Like it's two really flawed teams pulling it together. That would be fun. And I know I'm a Rams fan, but I agree. Chiefs Rams, like that is two stuttering offenses and two defenses that can shut things down. That would be another Rams Patriots Super Bowl. Either that or Chiefs Eagles, just because we saw that a couple of years ago.
That's what I was going to say. I was going to say, not because of the points. I think if it's Chiefs Eagles, I've seen that. It's the same with when it was always Chiefs 49ers and stuff. You just get bored of it. And it's just, for me, I think the game I want to see is like Hannah said, the Lions with the Bills or the Ravens. I think if it's Lions-Ravens, the Ravens can be scored or passed, and the Lions are going to put up 40 points, but the Ravens are going to run through them and just put up 40 points as well. And you know what I mean? We could get to the end of the Super Bowl and there's like 86 points been scored or something like that, you know, and it's just they're like every play was a touchdown and it's mental, like, you know, I think that would be wicked to see.
Agreed. So let's get on to the big news of the week. 21 minutes into the show. The only thing I have so far, I mean, we've seen Mike McCarthy now officially not be sacked, but be not renewed by the Cowboys. So we'll see what happens there. But the big one thus far is Mike Vrabel has been announced as the head coach of the New England Patriots. I'm full of conspiracy theories here that this is what they wanted the whole time and that they hired Gerard Mayo as an interim, essentially, so that Vrabel wouldn't be the guy to succeed Belichick. I think you want a buffer in there, but this was so obvious. I'm intrigued to know your guys' thoughts. Paul, I'll come to you first. When it comes to the Patriots for next year, and particularly looking for fantasy for Drake May, what impact do you think this will have? What kind of hire do you want to see around as offensive coordinator? How would you feel about the Patriots generally looking into next year with this hire?
I think it's good, and I think it's the right path, but I don't think there's not enough on that team for me to get excited about. You know what I mean? There's a lot of pieces that you're like, oh yeah, actually they're not bad. They're not bad. I think Drake May's a really good quarterback, and I do like what he can be in the future. But I think they're kind of in a rebuild now, and I know they've got an early pick. I can't remember. Is it they picked number 2 or number 3, something like that. So I like what they can do with this team. I think there's a lot of pieces that need to be put into place for me to be super excited about it. I think he's a good head coach, but I think he's got his work cut out for the first season. So I don't think there's many, from a fantasy side of things, there's many players that I'm getting really excited about as such, you know?
Yeah, I think that is completely fair. It's interesting thinking what we were saying earlier, just in terms of their draft pick. Like, because they're picking up 4. If the Bengals hadn't lost to the Patriots in week 1, the Bengals will be in the playoffs, and the Patriots will be picking first overall, which both of those teams would prefer, which is very funny to me. Hannah, how about for you? What are your thoughts on this hire? We might have lost Hannah.
Hannah loves it, and she thinks that they're going to do better than the Bengals next year. That's what she said.
They did beat them this year. Well, I'll give mine, and then if Hannah rejoins, she can give hers. I really like Mike Vrabel as a head coach. I think he's a culture setter in the Dan Campbell mode more than he's a particular mind, or Mike Tomlin as well, like more than he's a particular mind of one side of the ball. So I don't hate it from that perspective. I think it's a good hire from that perspective because I think they need a resetting of the culture. I just always prefer a young quarterback to be paired with an offensive mind. And I think I'll be very intrigued to see what they do at offensive coordinator. If they go full Patriots and bring back like Matt Patricia or Bill O'Brien or something, I'm fully out. But if they can go and get, I mean, not Liam Cohen, because obviously he's going to be going for head coaching roles, but that sort of hire where you look to one of these explosive offenses and you hire their quarterbacks coach or their wide receivers coach or something like that as your OC, I'd be very intrigued. Hannah, we lost you. What are your thoughts on the Mike Vrabel hire?
I think my opinion is probably similar to yours, Lewis. I missed your beginning, but I think you may have said it kind of depends on the OC, to be honest, which is my thoughts. You know, I think from, like Paul said, from a culture perspective, he's an awesome guy. I just think we need to find out who the OC is to kind of give us a better idea as to how we think that's going to work. And yeah, we've seen some pretty terrible Patriots offenses the last few years. So I think a different kind of voice and kind of opinion there, I think really would benefit. And obviously May needs wide receivers and an O-line and all sorts of different things. So probably not going to fix it all in one season. But he's promising, which is great to see, isn't it? And that's what we want. And maybe 2025 might not be his year to be a QB1, but maybe going into 2026, you know, if there's more pieces around him, we can feel much more comfortable from a fantasy perspective.
Absolutely. And all of the stuff that we've covered so far is a lovely segue into our main feature for today. So as we did last off-season, we're going to be doing positional reviews for the season pass and kicking off with the quarterback position today. And obviously we've had a bit of Drake May chat, we've had a bit of Sam Darnold chat. So it's nice to be starting to think about the quarterback position. I wanted to start by looking pre-draft and looking into what were you thinking about quarterback coming into the year? So I've got the ADP of the top 12, which I will read to you now. And then just to think about how were you looking at this? Who were your targets or who were you fading even? So the ADP coming into the season was Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jalen Hurts, Lamar Jackson, CJ Stroud at 5, Anthony Richardson, Joe Burrow, Kyler Murray, Jordan Love, Dak Prescott, Brock Purdy, Jaden Daniels. Hannah, we'll start with you. What was your approach looking at that ADP to quarterback in drafts this season?
So for me, I never like to be the one who takes the first QB off the board. So actually, Josh Allen usually was not the guy that I would take. But I found that I was reasonably comfortable to take kind of the more elite guys because they dropped down the board a little bit more this season. Obviously, last season they were like round 1, round 2. This season people had kind of cooled on them a little bit, which made me more comfortable taking them. But usually my target there in the elites was Lamar, because he was still in the elite category, but he was like the last guy being taken. So I usually would go for Lamar where I could. Stroud was a big fade because he's a pocket passer really, and people just got excited about what he did last season. So I was like, no, I don't think Stroud is going to finish as the QB.
I think we might have lost Hannah again. Which is okay. Hannah was obviously talking about the Stroud. He was my main fade going into last off season, and definitely thought that was way too high of a price that people were paying for him. Was he someone that you looked at as someone that could have a bit of value, or was he someone that you were potentially fading as well?
He was the easiest fade of the season for me. I don't think I actually did a draft this year where I took CJ Stroud, you know, and I did a lot of charity leagues and everything like that. And I genuinely don't think there was anywhere where I went, oh, do you know what? I want CJ Stroud here. So yeah. He was the easiest fade for me this year. My approach to sort of QBs this year, I felt I had a lot of late pick, like I was picking in the late 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, that sort of position. So I feel like I took an absolute abundance of sort of like the Kyler Murray, Dak Prescott, double QB on the turns and stuff like that, or took Kyler at sort of like 9 or 10 and then Dak coming back on the start of the next one. So I feel like I had a lot of them, or if I tried to do something a little bit different, it was like Anthony Richardson, that and sort of that sort of player. So I didn't do too well in some leagues this year because I sort of like drafted Anthony Richardson and Dak Prescott, or Kyler Murray and Dak Prescott. Don't get me wrong, Kyler had a fairly decent season and finished as a QB1, but I don't really feel like I hit that well on QBs this year, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough. I have actually gone through the redraft teams that I did the best on, and on every single one, I either drafted Lamar Jackson, Baker Mayfield, or both. Obviously, my Scott Fishbowl team had both, and that was the two targets to me. Like, that was Baker seemed like such a huge value to me, and was someone that I took a huge amount of. But I basically took the approach of, like, as you say, Patrick Mahomes was a really easy fade. CJ Stroud was a really easy fade. Hurts was actually really good for fantasy, but it never really felt it. But I didn't take too much of Hurts. Basically, for me, it was Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, or I'm going to push and wait till much, much later. And I had Jaden Daniels in a few places as well, because it's just about looking for upside later. The mistake that I made was Anthony Richardson, and I've been intrigued to know your guys' thoughts on whether you took a lot of him and what we can potentially learn from Anthony Richardson's failings, because I took a fair amount of him, actually. Especially in best ball, especially on DraftKings, because and I did go back and have a look, and he was our sneaky, when we do our who can finish top in each position show, he was our, Anthony Richardson can be the quarterback one if everything goes perfectly, and it obviously really, really didn't. But I'm intrigued to know your thoughts on sort of ceiling versus floor. Obviously, if you're taking Josh Allen or Lamar Jackson, you know that you have both a very high ceiling and a very high floor. If you're taking a quarterback later down the board, are you looking for a Jared Goff type who you think is going to get you 16 points per game and be fine? Or are you trying to shoot for that, Lamar in his first MVP season, 2018 or 2019, where he was drafted in like the 11th round and broke fantasy football? Are you trying to shoot for upside later on, or are you trying to find stability? We'll come to you, Hannah, first on that one, if that's okay.
I think some of it depends on the team that I've drafted already and what I feel I need from the position. But the problem with Anthony Richardson is you can see the ceiling, right? The ceiling is a Lamar, a Josh Allen. He's a rusher. Technically, he, can pass as well, if everything went perfectly, there he goes. The problem is he can't actually throw the ball, and that's where he lost his floor. So he has no floor but a massive ceiling, and I think just everything went off the rails for him. But if you look at Jaden Daniels, he's basically what we wanted Anthony Richardson to be. Maybe not quite as, the ceiling's maybe not quite a Josh Allen, but that's what we thought Anthony Richardson is going to be. So I can't blame people for taking Anthony Richardson where they did, because you can totally see what the ceiling is. And if everything did hit, he would have been your league winner this year, right? So you can't blame people for doing that. And a lot of it will depend for me on what kind of league am I in. Is it a single QB league? And if that's the case, I'm shooting for upside. I can pick someone up off the waiver wire, if it doesn't go well, that's fine. If it's a 2 QB league, then maybe I want to go a bit more for stability. Again, depending on who my QB1 is. If I went in Anthony Richardson as my QB1, then I'm going to go stability as my QB2. If I've gone Lamar, I think I feel confident that I know what Lamar's going to give me. So maybe I'm going to try and get a Jaden Daniels and see if I can then boost those extra points in the Superflex position. So it all depends on, the drafts. I took very little Baker Mayfield this year because I thought last year was his ceiling. Like we were talking about Sam Darnold. We were like, this year's his ceiling. We're not going to take him because how can he do any better? So I was like, last year was Baker's ceiling, and I think Baker's going to come back down to earth a little bit. And that just was not the case. So sometimes I think we can get too much into our player takes and not come off them, and then you regret missing out on a player. I took loads of Kyler this year because I was like, he's a rushing QB who's a value, and that shot me in the foot. Unfortunately, he didn't quite do. There were some weeks that he did all right, but a lot of them he didn't do as well as I thought. That was a very long, roundabout way of saying, it kind of depends, to be honest. I am a bit flexible.
No, you make some really, really good points. Kyler's end to the season was really interesting because he finishes as a QB10, but it didn't really feel like it in your championships. How about for you, Paul? Are you looking at ceiling or floor if you're drafting a quarterback later on?
Do you know what? I don't want to sit here and say I'm exactly the same as Hannah, but it does really sort of depend on your build and the way that you sort of set your team up. If your team's reaching for something, then you try and get a bit of stability in there. If your team's all about stability, you want that upside, you know. I think for me, something that I've picked up on this year is like your later round QBs, you want sort of stability more than anything. If you look at some of the players that have got into that sort of like finishing as a QB1, you know, you've got somebody like Sam Darnold in there, and then if you get to like QB, like high-end QB2, you've got Geno Smith, Brock Purdy, Aaron Rodgers. You know, these type of players don't really have rushing upside. They have that stability and stuff like that. So if you can't get somebody like, and I think after what we've seen this year, people like Jaden Daniels, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Kyler Murray, all these players are going in the top 10 QBs, you know, your ones with your rushing upside, they're all going to go. So I think moving forward, you're going to have to look for that QB that has that stability. Somebody like we said, Sam Darnold or Geno Smith or Brock Purdy and stuff like these. You know, these players are going to be your Jared Goffs. They're going to be somebody that you go, do you know what? I want one of the Konami code QBs, one of your rushing QBs that can get you all them points. And then I want actually somebody that is very stable, very good, and all they're going to do is pass a shitload and score touchdowns, and they're going to be a good QB2 for you. You know, I think that's something I have learned this year, that them players are actually decent to get. Somebody, you know, like I mentioned, Jared Goff, Geno Smith, Sam Darnold. I think they're very valuable in your team next to a Lamar Jackson, a Josh Allen, a Jaden Daniels. One of them players, if you can get one of them and one of, you think if you started this year with Lamar Jackson and Baker Mayfield for yourself, Lewis, like, you know, you absolutely dominated. Where at the start of the season, if I'd have said to you, what QB pairing do you want in your team to dominate the season, you'd have gone, Lamar Jackson and Jared Goff, or, you know, Josh Allen and Jared Goff, something like that. You know, so I think I'm going to be quite forceful with that QB2 and who I want, you know.
I think QB2 for sure. Like, it's a stability thing to me. I think if I'm double tapping, and if I'm later on, if I'm going to go, all right, I'm going to take Anthony Richardson. I mean, he was going a little bit early for this, but if I'm going to take Anthony Richardson or someone with a rushing floor that has a high ceiling, I need my other quarterback to basically, you've said his name a lot, to just be Jared Goff. And whether it's to be like Jared Goff or to specifically just be Jared Goff that I draft, having someone to reliably get you like 17, 18 points a game is so useful at the quarterback position, especially if you're taking them late on, meaning that your advantage is going to be elsewhere because you've not taken quarterback early. Let's get on to the way that it finished this year. So the QB1 on the season was Lamar Jackson. Then it was Josh Allen, Joe Burrow. Very interesting that our 3 MVP candidates were the top 3 finishers. Baker Mayfield as QB4, Jaden Daniels, Jared Goff, Bo Nix, Jalen Hurts, Sam Darnold, Kyler Murray, Patrick Mahomes just sneaking on as QB11, and Justin Herbert, which I think is a really interesting list, especially that 4 to 7 spots with Baker, Daniels, Goff, and then Nix. Paul, let's start with you. I mean, before we get on to surprises, what's the initial reactions looking at that list? Does that feel like the way that it felt this season?
Yeah. Do you know what? I think it does. I think the top 7 feel like that. I think, you know, I've watched all of them players have massive weeks and exploded and stuff like that. I think, or even the top 6, you'd sort of argue and go, yeah, they all deserve to be there. And then, you know, I think Pat Mahomes, he feels a lot higher than he should be. Yeah. Like, I don't really feel like if you had Pat Mahomes, you know, I play in a lot of redraft leagues, and there was a lot of people going like, you know, 1 QB leagues, you can drop Pat Mahomes, and I know that sounds absolutely insane, but you could drop him because he wasn't helping your team. But then you look at this and you go, he was the 11th best QB on the season. He definitely helped your team. You know, it's crazy. I think the top, I'll say the top 6 sort of finished the way that I sort of, or you could make an argument for any one of them being there, but then the next just feel a bit crazy, to be honest. A bit like I didn't expect some of them to be there.
Yeah, absolutely. How about for you, Hannah?
To be honest, there's a lot of pocket passers up high, aren't there, this year, which I think is a surprise. And I think ultimately that will mean that next year there's going to be a bit of volatility to it. And I think if we draft thinking that the next season is going to be the same as this one, I think there's going to be a lot of disappointed people, because I think, you know, variance in passing touchdowns, you know, how well the offense is playing. You know, Ben Johnson leaves Detroit and then, you know, they're not doing quite as well. And so it's obviously, having gone through the season, it makes sense. But I don't think any of us would have predicted before the season that this would be the way the top 12 shook out.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's really interesting because passing in the league was down this year. So to see pocket passers, 3, 4, 6, 9, 11, and 12, I think is really interesting. What about surprises? When you look at this list, which one quarterback either surprises you with how high they were or how low they were? Hannah, we'll start with you.
It's got to be Bo Nix, hasn't it? You know, coming into the season, did anyone predict that Bo Nix would be a QB1 at the end of the season? I don't think so. I mean, you know, ultimately he got drafted as the 4th QB in the draft. I think maybe we would have said, fine, maybe he's the 3rd best QB from this draft class. But, you know, 4th, sorry, because we had the 3, didn't we? We had May, Daniels, and I forgot about Drake May, didn't I? Whoops. So ultimately, you know, yes, maybe he was the 4th best in this class, but he turned out to be the 2nd best guy for fantasy this season from this class, which is not what I expected at all.
He was actually even later than that. So he actually was he was at pick 12, but he was the 6th quarterback off the board.
Was he the 6th?
Penix went at 8. And then JJ McCarthy went at 10. The Vikings traded up 1 spot to get McCarthy, because you had Sean Payton laughing that they traded up ahead of them when they wanted Bo Nix anyway.
I forgot about McCarthy. This is what happens when they don't play the whole season, isn't it? But yeah, I mean, 6th guy, and then he finished the 2nd in fantasy. And I don't think any of us would have predicted that. I think we were a bit like, oh, they've taken Bo Nix because they just need a quarterback. This is not going to work. And somehow Sean Payton and him managed to kind of figure out a way that seems to work. Now, ultimately, will he finish this high next season? I do question. I think maybe, you know, teams are going to figure them out a bit more. He needs to start growing a bit more. So I think I don't feel wholly confident that he'll be a QB1 next season. But wow, you know, to be honest, I reckon you could have picked him up on waivers in pretty much every league you were in, even potentially Superflex, because people just weren't even thinking about him being a startable option this season.
Yeah, 100%. And I'm going to save my Bo Nix takes for a little bit later on, because I'm going to talk about him for a question later. But Paul, who is your biggest surprise looking at this list?
Do you know what? I think looking at this list, you could probably say that there's 3 that probably haven't surprised me. Okay, that's Lamar Jackson finishing in the top 2, not really surprising for what he can do. Josh Allen finishing in the top 2, that doesn't really surprise me. And Kyler Murray finishing about 10th, that doesn't really surprise me. Okay, rest you could probably say I'm quite shocked. Joe Burrow at 3 feels like he's had a really good season and finished higher than we thought. Baker out of nowhere has finished 4th. Jaden Daniels, we all had a suspicion that he could finish up there, but we didn't think it would be so high. Jared Goff, Bo Nix, same thing. We didn't think that they'd finish that high. Jalen Hurts feels like he's finished a lot lower than what he can. Sam Darnold, where's he come from? Absolutely no idea. Pat Mahomes, we didn't think that he'd finish that low. And Justin Herbert feels like again, he's finished probably a little bit lower than what everyone thought going into this season, you know? So I think there's quite a bit that's quite surprising about this list. I'm not going to sit here and agree with Hannah that Bo Nix is the biggest surprise. So I'll say something different and say that the biggest surprise for me is Sam Darnold. He's just come from absolutely nowhere. You know, he was what, drafted at the Jets 6 years ago, at number 1 overall, and then he's never sort of really did it at the Jets. Where did he go after the Jets?
Panthers straight after the Jets,
Panthers,
I think.
yes, it was the Panthers. Has he been anywhere else before the Vikings? I feel like he's been to another team.
He was on the 49ers last year as a backup.
And then goes to the Vikings. And obviously the Vikings, as we just said, they traded up to get JJ McCarthy in the draft. He then suffered an injury in preseason, didn't he? He broke his leg in preseason. So then Sam Darnold gets the nod. And all of a sudden, he's finished as the QB9 for fantasy overall. And if anything, he's solidified himself as a starting QB somewhere next year. I'm not going to put my hand on it and say that he's at the Vikings, but I think he'll be a starting QB somewhere next year. So I think he's a big shock for me.
Yeah, I completely agree on Sam Darnold. I was reviewing some of my DraftKings teams, and Sam Darnold was going in the 19th round. Sam Darnold was nearly an undrafted player, especially when you were drafting earlier in the summer before the JJ McCarthy injury, that we thought, okay, Darnold probably gets 3 to 4 games, or maybe until the bye, and then we'll see JJ McCarthy, and then to finish as a QB9 is unreal. I think, to me, Nix and Darnold are the clear biggest favourites. Jalen Hurts finishing all the way down at QB8. I know he's still sort of a mid to low end QB1, but this is the tush push guy. This is the guy who just scores rushing touchdowns and still scored an incredible amount of rushing touchdowns this year. But the drop off of that offense, it's hard to see that this isn't potentially a Jalen Hurts problem. I know the play calling isn't fantastic, but what more could you want around you than a top 3 offensive line, the best running back in the NFL, arguably, a top 5, top 2 wide receivers, a very good tight end. What else could you want around you in order to succeed in fantasy football, or succeed in the NFL as well, but particularly in fantasy football? What about the situation could be better other than slightly better play calling? And he finishes all the way down at QB8. Is this just the Jason Kelce thing? I don't think so, because the tush push was still working. And the part of the narrative on Saquon Barkley was still, he's still not scoring that many rushing touchdowns. He's just having a ridiculous amount of, or goal line touchdowns. He's just having a ridiculous amount of success throughout the rest of the field. But Hurts all the way down at QB8 is a big surprise to me. We obviously touched on Patrick Mahomes already, and I wanted to have a little bit of a look at this, because obviously QB11 surprised me, because I felt like people were talking about the fact he was in the QB20 range at some point during the season. So he only had 4 finishes inside the top 10 all season, but finishes QB11. Paul, we'll start with you. Where do you think he gets drafted next season? And if we start to get a discount on Patrick Mahomes, would you be willing to buy the dip?
Are we talking dynasty here?
No, in redraft leagues next season.
Okay. So in redraft leagues, I still think he goes as a QB1. I think the fantasy football community sort of do this a lot, and you'll know what I mean when I say it. So I remember 2 years ago, Justin Herbert was arguably up there with the top tier. It was Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen, and Justin Herbert. They were arguing about these 3 being the top QBs. Then Justin Herbert drops off, and now we're seeing it with Pat Mahomes, and is Kelce going to be back next year? Is he going to be any good? Have they got good wide receivers? Have they got this? Have they got that? One thing I know about Pat Mahomes, yes, okay, he doesn't score you that week where you score 50 points, but he is consistent. Okay, he's not finished as a top. He's finished as a top 10 4 times this season. Yeah, and yet somehow he's still a QB1. Now, would you rather him in your team where you're consistently getting numbers, or would you rather, I don't know, I'm trying to think, like a Brock Purdy, that if he's missing a couple of players, all of a sudden has a down week, you know? So I think for me, Pat Mahomes is probably going to drop a little bit. And, he's not going to be somebody that I'm like, oh my God, like last year, what we were saying, he was QB2 ADP going into the season next year. He's definitely not that for me, but I still think I'd make an argument for him around that sort of 6, 7, 8 mark, because let's be honest, we all play this game, and we've all played this game for many years. Now, if I said to you, right, okay, Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, Jalen Hurts goes off the board as the first 5, then you go, right, who's next? Well, are you going to take Jared Goff? Are you going to take Bo Nix? Or are you going to take Pat Mahomes? Which one would you rather take out of them 3? Which one of them 3 do you think can have a better season next year? Or which one of them do you think is going to fall off and not repeat what they've repeated this year? So I just think Pat Mahomes sort of brings that level of stability to your team. And as we were saying earlier, how you pick your next QB is what you do. So if you were to pick somebody like Pat Mahomes at, I don't know, QB7 off the board, pick Pat Mahomes, that's when you'd be looking for massive upside in your next player. That's when you'd be sort of taking a risk with somebody like Bo Nix and going, if I can get Bo Nix as well and hope that they both take off and stuff like that, that's how I'd build my team. But I do think he's still a top sort of 8, top 7 QB. I still think I'd be taking him around there. I'd be quite happy about it as well, if I'm honest.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair enough. And I think it's interesting that we were talking about that kind of ceiling versus floor argument. And for a while, Patrick Mahomes is seen as that kind of ceiling outcome. And now actually it might be like the Jared Goff, Kirk Cousins thing that you're going, the floor is there. And I think it's an interesting argument if you can get him around the middle rounds. At what point, Hannah, would you be comfortable drafting Pat Mahomes as your QB1 next season? Or is he someone that you just think is going to end up going too high for you to actually click that button?
Yeah, I reckon he's still going to go in the top 5 because it's the name recognition, isn't it? Patrick Mahomes, he's the best QB in the world. He's the GOAT, blah, blah, blah. He's better than Tom Brady. Like, I just think people won't sit back and look at it from a fantasy perspective. They'll just go, it's Patrick Mahomes. He's going to be great. I'm going to pick him. So I would be very surprised if he drops out of the top 5. And for me, that's still a bit rich. I don't think I'm going to be clicking him. Like, I would much rather, wait a bit. Well, who knows where Jaden Daniels is going to go, but, see if I can get Jaden Daniels or, someone else a bit later on. I think he's still going to be too rich for me to click him at that point.
I think Jaden Daniels is going to go as the QB3 next season. I think ADP is going to say. I think it's going to go Lamar, Allen, Daniels.
I 100% agree with you. I was going to say I think you're going to have to take Jaden Daniels in the top 3 to get Jaden.
Then I would probably. I mean, I don't know where Hurts is going to fall. I think he's still going to be in the top 4 or 5, but I just think I'd rather pay more and get one of those than Pat Mahomes. So, like, if he's going 5, 6, I'd probably just wait. I reckon Joe Burrow will go after him. I'd rather take Joe Burrow, to be honest.
I think next year I'm going to have a lot of Pat Mahomes and a lot of Anthony Richardson.
Yeah.
I feel like everyone's going to be out on Anthony Richardson, and I'm going to go, do you know what? He's so cheap now, he's worth putting on my bench.
Yeah, I think that's completely fair. Going to start to close us out with the last few questions. If you had to pick one of these quarterbacks as your biggest league winner, who would you go for? Hannah, let's come to you first.
So is this for next season? Who we think is going to be...
For this season, who was your league-winning quarterback this season?
Oh, well, to me, it has to be Bo Nix, right? You picked him up off waivers, particularly in these super flex leagues. I mean, if you picked him up off waivers and put him in your team, then that value that you've got from him is like nothing you've got from anyone else. So, yeah, I think it has to be him.
How about for you, Paul?
So I would agree with Hannah Bonix, but I'm going to be different. I'm going to say Baker Mayfield. I think he was very cheap, and he's finished so high that and Lewis, apart from the last hurdle, he took you to the final of the Scott Fish Bowl, and so Baker Mayfield or Lamar Jackson, whichever one you want.
Yeah, I think for me it's Baker, and partly that's like the emotion of it, of seeing how well he did in a bunch of my teams this year. But like that stack, particularly in the playoffs and in that Panthers game, that like actively won you leagues the last few weeks of the season. How, if it has, how has this season influenced the way that you are going to approach quarterback next year and beyond, and just the way that you look at the quarterback position? So for me, especially, I think like we often talk about not taking rookie quarterbacks, and this isn't something I'm going to be doing next year because I'm not huge on the rookie class at this point anyway. But I think like rookie quarterbacks have thrived the past few years, and I think we need to not be scared of them. And I think reevaluating the way that I treat rookie quarterbacks, it's a great way to get value that I don't think you can get anywhere else. How about for you, Paul? Is there what have you learned that you're going to take into the quarterback position for next year and beyond?
So I play a lot of Superflex, and I've learned this year that the first 2 rounds don't have to be quarterback. There is always value later on, and I think if you look at Baker Mayfield, Jared Goff, Bo Nix, Sam Darnold, Justin Herbert, all of these players you probably could have got round 3 and beyond. So I think what I've learned is I don't necessarily know. I've always liked to do it where the first 2 rounds, if I can go QB, it really sets me up in a good position. But if I go, I don't know, QB, if say for example this year I'd have gone Kyler Murray at 8, 9, 10, something like that, and then got somebody like Saquon on the way back, you know what I mean? I think I would have got so much value there, it's unreal. So I think for me, there is always value later on with QBs, and we're seeing that year on year now, where you are finding them later round QBs are sneaking into that top 12 and stuff like that. So I think for me, it's I can sit back and actually I don't have to panic pick and go bam 2 QBs just because I have to get 2 of what the ADP is, the top 12 QBs.
Yeah, I absolutely love that. And I think something we all need to learn is not to panic on quarterback early on in Superflex. How about for you, Hannah? What have you learned from this season?
For me, I think it's, when I'm in that kind of QB2 range, so let's say I've missed out on an elite, and I've waited a bit. I think for me, it's to diversify who I take in those kind of late round QB zone. I was very much a Geno girl this year. I was like, Geno Smith's so undervalued. He's going to do awesome. He's a great quarterback. I think, unfortunately, things didn't quite click on offense. His O-line didn't help him out, and it meant that he ended up being, I don't think he finished as high as he could have done. If I'd have not taken like 10 Geno shares and gone with a bit of Baker and a bit of Darnold, and a bit of Goff, then I would have been much better. So I think just being a bit more flexible and also willing to take other players rather than honing in just on my player targets. I think that works for the whole position. Don't just take the one elite. I believe in Patrick Mahomes. I'm going to take Patrick Mahomes because you'll have failed this season. Whereas if you diversify a bit and say, "I'll take a bit of Josh Allen, I'll take a bit of Lamar, a bit of," then you're more likely to hit. I mean, I think the difficulty is when you're only playing 1 or 2 leagues, that makes it difficult. We're lucky we play. We're not, well, some people will say we're lucky, some people will say we're not. But we play in lots of leagues, so we have the opportunity to diversify. But I really think if I'm going to go early on, it has to be a rusher, and if I'm going later on, then you're looking at offenses that we think are going to do well. Ultimately, the Bucs did great. We didn't know Washington was going to do great, but they did. We knew the Lions were going to be good. And the Vikings had all of the pieces. So just diversifying a bit in that late round, I think certainly would have helped me.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's close it off by just naming one early target at the quarterback position for next season. Paul, who do you have?
Jaden Daniels. I want a lot of Jaden Daniels. I don't have very, very many shares of Jaden Daniels this year, so I'd love to have that.
Hannah.
The only thing I can imagine there, I know we need to finish, but is that he's like a little twig, and he's done really well this season. He's not got injured really at all. Well, I know he had the ribs, but he kept playing through it. Yeah. Knowing, us, he'll go boom in the first game, and that'll be him out for the season.
And then you can message me going,
I know, but I really like.
Just 10 teams fucked now, isn't it?
Yeah, I agree. I really like Jaden Daniels for next season. These rushers, but like you say, I think he's going to finish quite high. But I think he's going to be like the Lamar of this year, like at the end of the elites, and the guy that I'll probably just pick. Am I targeting anyone else? Not really. I'm kind of happy to mix it up. I don't think there's anyone that I'm like, oh, this is going to be a big value. Anyone you're looking at, Lewis?
Well, I wanted to make sure that I closed off the show by giving a quarterback his flowers that we haven't spoken about at all today. And it's someone that was like undraftable.
I'm going to guess Bryce Young.
It is Bryce Young. Bryce Young in the last 6 weeks of the season had 3 finishes.
For God's sake.
3 finishes inside the top 10 quarterbacks, 5 rushing touchdowns in the last 6 weeks. I don't know where Bryce Young is going to go next season. I would suggest somewhere outside the sort of QB 16 to 20 range.
That's where he's going to go, where he belongs. He's trash.
Oh, mate, he's not trash. He played so well at the end of the season. If you think he's trash, you've not been watching the games. Like, he played so well to close out the season. If they can get another weapon in Carolina, there is a real chance for Bryce Young to finish as a low-end QB1. And he's someone that, because he established that rushing floor as well, they changed the offense to look more like what Bryce Young can run, and he was genuinely fantastic. Look at any advanced metric for the end of the season, and that will tell you that is a quarterback that broke out at the end of the season.
Next, you're going to put up these stats against CJ Stroud's and be like, oh, yeah, he played so well compared to CJ Stroud.
He did play better than CJ Stroud at the end of the season. I'm not saying he's better than CJ Stroud. I don't think he is. He did play better than CJ Stroud.
They had nothing to play for.
Yeah, but also then managed to beat the Falcons at the end of the season and put up like 40 points. You can't do that if you don't have anything. But he's an interesting sort of later round target for me next season if they can get another weapon.
I'm glad you said later round.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I do think May will be interesting if they get him a few pieces. I do. I think he might be a interesting QB2.
Yeah, absolutely. With the rushing floor as well. Nice to end the show with a little argument. It's always it doesn't feel right if we don't have one. It's normally not me involved. It's normally you two scrapping. But nice.
I'm just looking at Bryce Young's numbers. So week 16 and week 18, he scored 27 and 36 points. Apart from that, 13.5, 14 and 16.9 on the other weeks. Oh, okay. So I want him. Sign him up. Take out them 2 games, and he was trash.
Right. So take out the 2. Okay. Can you take out the 3 bad games and leave the 2 good ones then? If we're allowed to just cherry pick the ones that we want to talk about.
Well, you're the one that's going, at the end of the season, he was great. This is a guy that was benched halfway through the season.
Yeah, and then played well after. I'm closing out the show. I'm going to end the show, and I'm going to name this show Bryce Young is brilliant, Paul is rubbish. That is going to bring us.
I will end this.
That is going to bring us to the end of the show. Thank you for tuning in. Paul, I will remove you if you talk again. Thank you for tuning in. Make sure to subscribe and follow us on X at Wildcard Rewind. Head on over to our YouTube channel, search for us at Fantasy Wildcard Podcast Network, and make sure you give us a subscribe. And we will see you next week.